Right, so we're going to talk about progesterone, estrogen and prolactin. Their relationships are very complex and to a large degree there is still quite a lot of dispute about how they work, what they do and their potential side effects. Now, estrogen is the most common of the three that we know the most about. There are four types of estrogen: E1, E2, E3 and E4. E4 is only present in females during pregnancy. The one that as males we are mainly concerned about is E2, estriol. Estrogen is created by the conversion of testosterone by the aromatase enzyme. So when you hear people discuss AIs, aromatase inhibitors, they work because they stop the production of aromatase, therefore they stop the conversion of test to estrogen. The downside of these drugs is that they are very harsh on your lipids, which is your cholesterol, HDL and LDL, and that when they're removed, there is an overproduction of aromatase, which causes an estrogen bloom. Now, estrogen, progesterone and prolactin at high levels can cause shutdown. So if you have elevated levels of estrogen, your body will stop producing testosterone because it senses that there are high levels of estrogen and it knows that estrogen is made from testosterone. Stop producing testosterone, you stop producing estrogen, and therefore estrogen is lowered. So high levels can cause shutdown, which is why AIs are not recommended in PCT, because when you remove them, you can get a balloon and that can cause you to shut back down, particularly at this point when you're going to be quite sensitive to shut down because you're trying to recover. Now, other effects of estrogen, some are good, some are bad. High level in males will cause water retention. They can cause gyno, which is the growth of breast tissue. They can cause acne, and they can cause the increase of fat deposit, particularly around the waist and hips. However, estrogen causes the upregulation of androgen receptors. Estrogen also supports HDL, good cholesterol, and reduces LDL, which is why AIs are so damaging to cholesterol and so much concern when being used. Now, other estrogen controls are stuff like suicide inhibitors, which is the main one is aromatase or exmestane. What this does is it binds to aromatase, so it doesn't stop the production, it just makes it inert. It means it can't act on testosterone. And the other ones are generally certain selective estrogen receptor modulators, and basically they block the estrogen receptor. So the estrogen is still there, but it blocks it at certain points, primarily breast tissue. So therefore you don't get gyno, but you still have the positive impact of estrogen on your liver, on lipids, on growth, and on androgen receptor upregulation. Now, what a lot of people may have noticed is you get these guys that are heavy on tren, heavy on letra, quite strong but carry no size, and one of the reasons is their estrogen levels are too low, so they fail to grow. It is a difficult balance. Exactly where you need to run your estrogen levels will depend on several factors, one of them being just how sensitive you are to estrogen. I like to run mid to upper range. That's enough to support a healthy system and promote growth without pushing into the levels when water retention and other aspects become a problem. Now, progesterone, for all intents and purposes as far as we're aware, doesn't have a great deal of use in a male. Massively important hormone in females, particularly around pregnancy. But what we do know is that it is part of the hormone production cycle. So within the testes, cholesterol is taken, it's converted to progesterone, and then in turn converted to testosterone. So, and it also has a massive impact on our neurochemicals and has a direct impact on dopamine and a few other receptors in the brain. So it does have an impact on mood, depression and anxiety. There are two types of progesterone receptors in the body. They are type A and type B. And they are probably the closest out of the hormone receptors to the androgen receptors. Too much progesterone will cause shutdown. There is some theory that it may play a possible role in sperm function, but it's a bit unclear at this point exactly how it would work. But we have progesterone receptors in our brains, we have them in smooth muscle and our reproductive sections. So, you know, unfortunately we have to, at this moment, wait until science catches up and can tell us exactly how much this hormone has an effect in our bodies, but this is roughly what we know. Now, there are some drugs that are labelled as progestins. What this means is that they will stimulate the progesterone receptor. Nandrolones, Deca and Tren have been given this title, as has oxymethylone. Now, they aren't progestins in a chemical term or in a scientific term. They wouldn't be classed as progestins, but they are in the sense that they trigger the progesterone receptor. Now, other effects that progesterone have in a male is that it increases, or should I say, it binds with 5-alpha reductase. Now, for those of you familiar, testosterone is converted to DHT, dihydrotestosterone, by 5-alpha. Because progesterone binds with this, it means less testosterone converts to DHT. Lower levels in DHT can have a feminizing effect. And generally it is regarded that issues with progesterone aren't related directly to progesterone, but are related through a secondary mechanism like this. It also increases SHBG levels. Now, we know that sexual hormone binding globule binds to testosterone, but we also know it binds to estrogen. However, it has a stronger binding affinity to testosterone than it does to estrogen. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of Proviron being used in PCT. Because yes, it does increase free-floating testosterone, but it also increases free-floating estrogen. Those levels get too high and they will cause for a call for shutdown. So, as progesterone increases SHBG levels, it will tie up more free test than free estrogen, and this will create an imbalance and the ratio will go out of whack, and again this can have what's known as a feminizing effect. Now, progesterone can be converted to right, you know I'm bad with pronunciations, androstenedione, yeah, something like that. No doubt someone will comment and put up a phonetic spelling of this shit. Sorry, you know I can't say half of these fucking words. I've always struggled with them. I know what I mean anyway. Anyway, this in turn can be converted to E2. So, increased levels of progesterone can result in increased levels of estrogen because it can convert to estrogen through a two-stage process. As we've already said, we know progesterone can shut down the HPT excess. It can cause complete testicular shutdown. And it can cause the upregulation of ER expression. Now, ER expression is estrogen receptor expression. So basically what that means is it can cause more estrogen in the receptor, make the receptor more sensitive, therefore you get a bigger bang for buck for the estrogen that's present. Now, as I said earlier, we've talked about nandrolones being classed as progesterone. They're not chemically, so you need to make that sure. But they do have an effect that is progesterone-like, but they are primarily androgens, and they will always be androgens, and they can never technically be known as progestins. Anyone getting lost yet? As I said, it is complex. But like you said, we do know that they have some form of interaction with the progesterone receptor. What we don't know just yet is to actually how much of a degree, and we don't know if that can lead to gyno. Now, plenty of people will say that when I take Tren or I take Deca, my estrogen is under control and I get gyno, but we'll get on to that in a minute. Now, roughly what we do know is that nandrolones, DECA, can activate the progesterone receptor at about 1/5 of what progesterone will, but it's believed that tren basically activates it equally. Tren will have the same effect on the progesterone receptor as progesterone will. Probably one of the reasons why we get such harsh shutdown with tren, because you've got elevated progesterone and you've got elevated androgen receptor trigger as well, and so you're going to get signals to the HPTA from two sources to create shutdown. It's also probably why tren has one of the major effects in the brain, that along with such a high binding affinity, because it can trigger the progesterone receptors in the brain. It can re-trigger that effect that has on mood. Now, excuse me. Sorry, phone was going in. For most cases of gyno, it has been shown that there are very released levels of DHT and elevated levels of SHB. There is a little bit of evidence that elevation of IGF-1 can also cause gyno from non-aromatizing steroids. In fact, there is some report of gyno as a side effect of finasteride use. Now, it's not that what they feel is that less testosterone get converted to DHT, and that causes an imbalance between DHT and estrogen more than elevated estrogen levels. Now, DHT cream has been used to treat gyno, and it can actually block estrogen from binding with its receptor in mammary tissue. So DHT is also an aromatase inhibitor. So it would appear that it's not that estrogen is high or that progesterone is high, it's that progesterone reduces the amount of testosterone that's converted to DHT, which creates an imbalance. Lower DHT is actually what's causing gyno, not elevated estrogen. And so the trick would be to have DHT. So you're looking at a DHT oral. Proviron may be very helpful in this. And it would appear that it's the ratio between these two drugs that's important, not the individual levels of estrogen or progesterone for that matter. So, to try and put this in some sort of sum up, progesterone or progestins, drugs that have an action on the progesterone receptor, increase receptor signaling, which leads to an increase in IGF-1. This in turn also increase progesterone receptor signaling, lower DHT levels. That stops DHT from protecting against gyno in breast tissue and results in estrogen, even at normal levels, having a greater impact on gyno. We don't know exactly how much each individual drug has an effect, but it would appear to be. The other thing you've got to also remember is that not only does nandrolone block DHT formation more so than trenbolone, but trenbolone elevates SHEB more than nandrolone. So we're not sure exactly what creates the biggest importance, because increase SHBG, you can end up with more estrogen, you can end up with more bound tests, which in turn is going to lower DHT. But you increase DHT, you decrease DHT formation from a nandrolone, and that's going to throw out the DHT estrogen balance, and DHT is not going to be there to protect against gyno. Now, it's always said, manage estrogen and you won't get gyno from progesterone. But the management of that estrogen changes when DECA and trenbolone is added, because they change balances, and so therefore estrogen is going to have to be run lower if you're suffering from gyno at that point. However, there'll be loads of people out there going, I take Kerber and my gyno goes away. So now we're going to look at prolactin, and I'm not doubting that. I've seen it myself. I've seen it in lots and lots of people where they've had gyno symptoms and they've been on Deco, they've been on Tren, and they've taken prolactin and those symptoms have gone. The unfortunate thing is these people don't test. So we don't know what prolactin levels are like, and range is quite up there. But I know in myself, when I've taken nandrolones, I have tested and I've seen prolactin levels quite high. Now, I've never been one to suffer from gyno. I do suffer from a lot of water retention. Some of that's my kidneys and some of that's just the way I am. I can tolerate estrogen quite well, and I don't get gyno, but I do get water and fat deposit. So, first of all, what is prolactin? Well, prolactin is a protein. It's a hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. Now, it's generally speaking, is when there's a rise in estrogen and progesterone, then that causes prolactin production. So what happens is progesterone causes development of the gland, and then prolactin will cause lactation. However, progesterone will prevent lactation from taking place until after the birth of the child, and progesterone and estrogen drop, and prolactin is then elevated on its own, and lactation is then come. Now, that's in females. So what happens in males? Well, if you're taking a compound that also acts on the progesterone receptor, then it can cause gyno formation. And in turn, if it's acting on a progesterone receptor, then as far as the body's concerned, progesterone is elevated. So therefore it's going to start to elevate prolactin. Now you get people that complain about lactation going into PCT or gyno going into PCT. Well, prolactin is elevated, progesterone is technically elevated. All right, it's not actually, but as far as the body is concerned, it is, because it's deciphering the signaling at the receptor from the nandrolones as being progesterone. So as far as the body's concerned, you've got high progesterone. So that in turn keeps the prolactin at bay, even though it is actually high. When you enter PCT, obviously progesterone and estrogen drop. You're no longer taking the progestin drug, and you estrogen control through PCT. Suddenly prolactin's left there on its own, and it mimics pregnancy, so it starts to lactate. Okay, so basically what we're saying is that if there's an increase in estrogen and androgen ratio, it doesn't matter what's caused it. If that balance changes and estrogen starts to elevate above androgen relation, that can cause the stimulation of prolactin. Now, again, a lot of prolactin's actions needs estrogen to be there, but what we're not sure about is at what level, and this is where it gets complex. So the old adage of if you control your estrogen you won't have issues with prolactin isn't quite true. And the other problem we have is that looking at studies, hyperprolactemia is the natural causation of high levels of prolactin. So basically it's a condition where as a male you have very high levels of prolactin. That does cause shutdown, but it doesn't cause gyno. And a lot of people who have gyno don't have elevated prolactin. In fact, generally it's thought that prolactin cannot on its own cause gyno. So why is it then when we take Kerber, which reduces prolactin, we reduce gyno? So science is telling us that prolactin on its own cannot cause gyno, and that it's progesterone or estrogen, or a drug that mimics progesterone at the receptor, deca, trembolone. Yet, when we take Caber with tren or deca-induced gyno, the gyno goes. But Caber reduces prolactin. It doesn't have an effect on progesterone. So this is where science and the real world doesn't add up. And it's difficult to really say what is generally going on. What I would say to people is that if you are suffering with gyno or the start of gyno, take a test, see what your prolactin levels are, and then when you add in your Caber or your bromocriptine, see what levels drop to and see what effect it has, and feed that information back into everybody, because this is the only way we're going to find out. Now, one theory is that prolactin acts as an agonist at the progesterone receptor. So what there's thought there is that prolactin itself can trigger the progesterone receptor. So then we go back into this progesterone-estrogen relationship, and then we go back in from there into this lowering of DHT, which causes an imbalance between DHT and estrogen. Lower DHT means not a protective effect at the mammary tissue, and therefore lower levels of estrogen can cause gyno. The truth is, we don't know, but there's the basic theories that, I'll sum this off. Gyno is caused by estrogen or by progesterone, but not directly by progesterone. It's caused by progesterone because progesterone lowers DHT and lowers free test, because it increases SHBG, which has a more of a dramatic effect on free-floating test than it does free-floating estrogen. Therefore, it changes the test-estrogen balance. We know DHT has a protective role within the mammary glands to stop estrogen causing gyno. So when DHT is lowered, that protective barrier goes, which means a lower level of estrogen can cause gyno. Now, drugs like nandrolone, oxys, and trembolone are regarded in their actions as progestins, not in the chemical makeup, but in their actions. What progestin does is have an effect on the progesterone receptors. So these drugs cause this shift in SHBG and this shift with DHT, creating abnormal balances, which means that low levels of estrogen can have an effect on gyno. It is believed at the moment, the theory is, that prolactin acts in the same way at the progesterone receptor. So it's not that prolactin has a direct effect on on gyno, though it is possible. There has been some cases with very, very high levels where it has directly caused gyno, but it is more likely that it stimulates a progesterone receptor like a progestin, and therefore triggers this DHT and SHB scenario. Okay, however, increased prolactin, increased progesterone, and increased estrogen will all cause shutdown. So, though reducing prolactin will in turn reduce the effect on the progesterone receptor, it is potentially just as important to bring estrogen even lower. However, the downside of bringing estrogen even lower is if we lose its protective element in the liver, we lose its protective element with HDL, and we are going to start to affect our ability to grow. To what extent? I don't know. I don't think anyone does, because there isn't really studies directly in this. Now, it has been thought that If you block GH and IGF, you will block gyno because it does play a role. But that's impractical and downright unhealthy, to be fair. So it's not something we're even going to look at doing. So what I would suggest is you test, you see where your estrogen and prolactin and progesterone levels are. Chances are progesterone levels are going to be fairly normal because it's not an elevated level of the hormone, it's an elevation of the progesterone receptor being triggered by a different chemical. Well, that'll either be your nandrolone or your trenbolone or your prolactin. And you can either increase DHT, and one way would be use DHT cream on your breast, another way would take a DHT oral or a DHT injectable, or you lower estrogen, or you lower prolactin, or you lower everything. However, there does become a point of diminishing return with lowering estrogen. So it would be down to what your personal levels were and how low you were having to go before the issue was resolved. So personally, I would approach it from different directions. I would increase DHT, I would reduce SHBG, I would look at slightly better management of my estrogen if it was high. If it was in very level control, then I probably wouldn't try and do much with that, and I'd more look at reducing prolactin. Pretty complex, I know. I was going to do it in two, but I just thought that splitting it would make it confusing. I hope that's been clear. I've tried to keep it as simple as I could, and it isn't easy, but hopefully that makes sense. So take care, guys, and I will speak to you all soon.